There are seasons in life when the silence feels louder than noise, when the phone stops ringing, when invitations slow down, when even familiar relationships seem distant. In those moments, loneliness can feel like rejection, like abandonment, like something is wrong with you. But what if your solitude is not punishment? What if it is preparation? What if God is not isolating you to harm you, but separating you to shape you? Throughout Scripture, God consistently uses solitude as a tool of transformation. Before Joseph stood in a palace, he endured isolation in a pit and a prison. Before Moses led a nation, he spent 40 years in the wilderness. Before David wore a crown, he tended sheep alone in open fields. Before Jesus began his public ministry, he was led into the wilderness. Solitude is often the workshop where God builds the strength required for destiny. When you are surrounded by noise, it is easy to depend on affirmation, attention, and applause. But in solitude, those external supports are removed. You begin to see what truly sustains you. You discover whether your identity is rooted in people's opinions or in God's presence. Solitude exposes your attachments. It reveals what you run to when no one is watching. Many people fear being alone because silence confronts them. In silence, insecurities surface, old wounds resurface, unanswered questions become louder. But this is precisely why God allows solitude. He brings you into quiet places so he can deal with the deeper places. God does some of his deepest work in hidden seasons. Roots grow underground before fruit appears above ground. When you cannot see visible progress, heaven may be working intensely within you. The world celebrates visibility, but God develops character in obscurity. In solitude, your prayer life changes. When there are fewer distractions, conversations with God become more honest. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You begin to speak from your raw places. And in that vulnerability, intimacy is born. God is not impressed by polished prayers. He responds to surrendered hearts. Solitude also teaches you spiritual endurance. When encouragement from others is limited, you learn to encourage yourself in the Lord. David did this when everything around him collapsed. He strengthened himself in God. That strength did not come from a crowd, it came from communion. There is a difference between isolation and divine solitude. Isolation is when you withdraw out of fear or bitterness. Divine solitude is when God strategically reduces distractions to focus your attention. The enemy uses isolation to weaken you. God uses solitude to refine you. In your lonely season, God may be detoxifying you from unhealthy dependencies. Sometimes we lean too heavily on relationships for validation. We rely on constant social interaction to avoid confronting our spiritual condition. When God removes certain connections, it is not always rejection. Sometimes it is protection. He knows that certain voices would distort your direction. Solitude sharpens discernment. When you are constantly surrounded by opinions, it becomes difficult to recognize God's voice. But in quiet seasons, you begin to distinguish his whisper. Elijah did not hear God in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He heard him in a still, small voice. That voice becomes clearer when distractions fade. Your lonely season may also be a training ground for leadership. If you cannot be faithful in private, you will not be stable in public. Public platforms magnify private weaknesses. God often hides you before he reveals you, so that when visibility comes, pride does not destroy you. Solitude confronts pride because there is no audience, there is no applause, there is no recognition. You obey God simply because he is God. That kind of obedience builds spiritual depth. It shifts your motivation from performance to devotion. In solitude, God heals wounds you did not realize were still bleeding. When distractions fade, suppressed pain surfaces. But exposure is the first step to healing. God does not expose to shame you, he exposes to restore you. He brings buried hurt into the light so it can lose its power. You may feel forgotten, but heaven has not lost your address. The absence of people does not mean the absence of God. In fact, some of the most powerful encounters in Scripture happened when individuals were alone. Jacob wrestled alone and left transformed. John received revelation while exiled. Hagar encountered God in the wilderness and called him the God who sees. Solitude teaches contentment. It teaches you to find joy in God alone. When you can worship without an audience, when you can pray without recognition, when you can remain faithful without praise, you have reached a deeper level of maturity. There is also protection in hiddenness. When you are not visible, you are not as vulnerable to certain attacks. God may be concealing you until the right time. Just because people do not see you does not mean God is not preparing you. In lonely seasons, the enemy will whisper lies. He will say you are abandoned, unwanted, irrelevant. But solitude is not a verdict, it is a process. The caterpillar must enter isolation before it emerges transformed. The seed must be buried before it grows. Burial looks like death, but it is the beginning of multiplication. You must choose how you respond to solitude. You can grow bitter, or you can grow deeper. You can complain about the quiet, or you can lean into it. If you use this season to seek God intentionally, you will come out stronger than you entered. Do not rush the hidden place. What feels slow may be strategic. What feels empty may be sacred. God is not wasting your quiet season. He is building stability, clarity, and dependence. When the time comes for expansion, you will not be driven by desperation for attention. You will be anchored in identity. You will not seek crowds to feel valuable. You will carry presence because you have known God in secret. Solitude is not the absence of purpose. It is often the birthplace of it. If you feel alone right now, consider that you may be in divine training. God may be separating you to elevate you. He may be quieting your environment to amplify His voice. The same God who met prophets in caves and shepherds in fields is present with you in your silent season. Your loneliness is not the end of your story. It may be the chapter where God writes the deepest lines of transformation into your soul.